Let me ask the first question, and then we'll take questions from the audience for the panel until about 2:45 when we'll break. Over the years, one of the things I've been concerned about as I teach about North Korea or study North Korea is the availability and quality of information about North Korea. I understand that clearly we have better information now than we did even 10 years ago, but how comfortable are you, in each of your different perspectives, that we do understand North Korean motives, that we have a good grasp on what's happening in North Korean society, and we understand what their goals are when it comes to negotiating? So just in turn, would you mind answering that question, then we'll take questions from the audience.
I'll start. I've been myself to North Korea 5 times, and I'll let you in a little secret. You were citing how many times Don Gregg had been there and Fred Carey had been there, and we all do this so we have a little badge of credibility. Oh, I've been to North Korea. The reality is the worst place in the world to understand North Korea is inside North Korea. You learn nothing, relatively, right? The society is so stovepipe, the flow of information is so bad, it's the worst place to go. But we all say it just because it gives us that credibility stamp, right?
That's cool.
Unfortunately, I'm at odds on this question. On the one hand, we obviously know a lot more than we've ever known before, right? And so it's incorrect to say we know nothing about North Korea as a black box. But about the most important issues, it is still the most opaque society on earth in terms of the decision-making process, the immediate clique around Kim Jong-il, their priorities, how they're making those decisions. Now, I think we know enough to kind of have a very vibrant debate in terms of what their motives are, where they're going, and general information flow is probably worse there than anywhere else. So to the point where I'm deeply concerned about a lack of knowledge of the fundamental decision-making process there. But we know a lot more than we did 15 years ago.
Well, we have more travelers into North Korea now, and anybody who wants to go to North Korea, even though it's forbidden by the State Department, can go. All you have to do is make the right approaches and kiss up a little here and there, and you can arrange to go. But I think what Gordon says is actually true. That I'm not sure what that really tells you about North Korea. One of the specific questions is, what do we know about their nuclear capability? And the folks that are telling us now, the North Koreans say they've got a bomb, but maybe that's in their interest. I mean, you said the first rule of diplomacy is don't ever tell the truth. So if that rule applies, they don't have a bomb because they say they do, so we know they don't. It's like a Mad Magazine, white spy, black spy, spy versus spy thing. But when the folks at the CIA tell you that they've got a bomb, remember, those are the folks that told you that Saddam Hussein had a bomb. Same source. So we just really don't know a lot of what's going on there. There's some interesting stuff on the websites if you want to look at discussion on whether they have a bomb or how many bombs they've got. And there are some people that don't think they have anything. And what were you telling me about Cambodia? Who was talking about Cambodia?
Chinese ambassador to Cambodia mentioned it.
Oh, yeah, Jeff was saying that they were saying they don't have a bomb. So who knows? I mean, everybody that knows about the area, the reporters, intelligence analysts, Don Gregg says it's the most opaque country in the world.
I don't claim to have any great insight into North Korea. Ambassador Christopher Hill, the Assistant Secretary of State, has said publicly anybody who claims to know what the North Koreans are thinking is lying. And I won't even attempt to suggest I know what's truly going on in Pyongyang. Most of the information that we get comes out of the South Korean media or sometimes the Japanese media, which is magnified, manipulated, often for ideological reasons. And I think part of the reason in trying to understand the Bush administration's intransigence is that they have to assume we do not know what's going on in North Korea, and they have to now plan for the worst case scenarios after 9/11.
Thanks. Let's take questions from the audience.
If no one else wants to ask, is North Korea ever going to collapse and be assimilated by South Korea, similar to East and West Germany? Are there signs there? How long can they prop themselves up? I mean, there are a lot of problems there.
Let me go first on this, and then you can respond. In this very room, sometime in 93 or 92, when it looked like Kim Il-sung's days were coming to an end, we had a thing like this. Jeff was on the panel. Were you here?
I was.
I made the prediction that from what we know from our good intelligence estimates of Kim Jong-il, we knew he was this great playboy. We knew that he had the world's best collection of pornography tapes, and all this sort of stuff was out about him, and what an incapable and wild person he was, and how he couldn't possibly be ready to take over. And you've got a Marxist country who's created a dynasty. You know, the very thing that the Marxists criticized, this feudal state of passing this kingdom from the father to the son, like the king to the crown prince, was going to happen. It was clear that was going to happen before Kim Il-sung died. So I boldly made the prediction here that 6 months after Kim Il-sung dies, somebody up there is embarrassed by Kim Jong-il. He's made a mess of things, and somebody's going to bump him off, a military general, a coup d'etat, something, and the country's going to fall apart. That was my prediction back then. I think I'm predicting the opposite way right now, and I think that to reinforce what I was saying earlier, the longer that the American government, whether it's the Bush administration and the next administration, if they continue to do the same thing, the longer they push Kim Jong-il into a corner, the longer they'll survive. Whereas the more paths of openness there are, in other words, the Sunshine Policy and the South Korean approach, I mean, it's their country, let them do it, you know? And the more that goes on, I think there are going to be greater chances for some movement, something happening internally. You know, Kim Jong-il has already started talking about the third generation. He's already talking about his son. And he's got 2 sons by 2 different wives, is that right? I haven't tracked this for a while, but he's got one son, the one that was embarrassed in Tokyo, traveling with a mistress, or 2 mistresses or something, and on his way to Tokyo Disneyland, on a Dominican Republic forged passport. That son apparently has been shipped to Siberia. And literally, I think he's gone off to Russia. I don't think he's even in the country anymore. And where is he? He's in China, Chinese Siberia. And the next son is being groomed. And they're starting to use the same parlance for the son. They don't say that Kim Il-sung didn't talk about his son Kim Jong-il. He talked about the center of the party. This is a strange phrase for reference to his son. Well, Kim Jong-il is starting to use that same terminology now, talking about the center of the party in reference to preparing for the next son to take over. So I think as long as there is external pressure to keep them together, it'll go to the third generation. But if things start to loosen up, where people start hearing things and they start learning more about South Korea, and you know, for a long time in North Korea, the propaganda about South Korea was, yeah, you got these rich South Koreans, but you got so many people that are virtual slaves. And I picked up some North Korean propaganda when I visited the North Korean embassy in Kathmandu one day. We were in Kathmandu, and I saw a flag. That looks like a North Korean flag. Is that a North Korean flag? Went in there, and they gave me some brochures. And in these brochures were things about Holt Adoption Agency. You know, all know Holt in Korea. And Holt was adopting Koreans to America, to the American South, to work on the cotton plantations. I mean, they're so out of touch. They can say that kind of thing. And as soon as North Koreans start looking at things on the internet and realizing how wealthy South Korea is, for example, and a lot of this stuff they've been told is baloney, things have to change.
I was here in '92, and actually, that's probably where my opinions began to diverge from Professor Peterson. No, the reality is, I mean, I, like everybody else, assumed that once the Soviet Union collapsed and China cut off its support, North Korea collapsed, right? And then when that didn't happen immediately, then the assumption shifted to be once the old man dies, Junior with his bouffant hair and platform shoes can't hold it together. But listen, Kim Jong-il has been dead for 12 years, right? And then as soon as we saw the severe famine in the mid-1990s, and again, I'm a little bit concerned by our discussion here because we've kind of painted this picture of North Korea as this benign entity just sitting there being affected by the North Koreans, By most accounts, 1 million to 2 million North Koreans died in the 1990s of starvation for no other reason than the nature of the regime. Nobody died of starvation in South Korea or Russia or China or even Mongolia that had a severe drought during that period of time, right? And so, I agree North Korea is an extremely hard state. And I also agree that by putting pressure on them, that we give them the one thing they need, which is external threat. But to me, that logic fundamentally contradicts Professor Peterson's notion that somehow they're willing to give up their nuclear power if somehow we're just be nice to them. That assumes that North Korea wants us to be nice to them when they need this external threat. Because they do need the external threat. In my mind, the North Korean regime has 3 pillars of its control. Control over the flow of information, control over the movement of people, control over the means of production. And what we have to offer them, opening, reform, membership in the world of nations, fundamentally undermines those 3 pillars. And so thence my real pessimism about somehow the scenario that if we're just nice to them, they're going to give all this up. Because it is inherent in the nature of the regime. And that's where you get to the fundamental problem. If the problem is the nature of the regime, and a regime which is now increasingly wrapping itself in the cloak of a nuclear state, and an army, again going back to the question of who runs things, right? Who by all accounts is the most backward, reactionary, conservative body in society, which oppose the agreed framework, which undermine the agreed framework, and is pushing the nuclear issue right now. Why in the world would we suspect that they would be willing to give up the one thing they have when their conventional military capacity continues to decline? When they don't even they have no serious invasive capacity of the North. They have no fuel. They can't fight for more than 2 weeks, right? So why do we assume that that group is going to give up the one thing that, again, Professor Peterson was just saying that they need to survive, right, to keep them alive? No, they wrap themselves in it entirely. So, do you have anything?
The former president of KEI, when he first started at KEI in 1996, his first week on the job, he went to a seminar of, including many of the people on the C-SPAN or CNN documentary you saw when they were in power, and somebody took a poll. How long do you think North Korea is going to last? And so 1/3 said 1 year. 1/3 said less than 2 years. The other third said less than 3 years. North Korea, unfortunately, is alive and well in its current state of affairs, but you have to give credit to the survivability of the regime. They have attempted some economic reforms in the last 3 years, and they've moved their growth from 1.8% to now 2.2% GDP growth per year. This contrasts with China, which since 1978 maintained 9% growth. So how long can North Korea continue its current incarnation? Who knows?
Let's take one more question before the break.
Sorry, can I get say? Thanks.
Okay, I kind of agree with the opinion that by kind of pushing North Korea back into a corner and creating this external threat that is only going to, and calling them the axis of evil, along with Iraq and everything, that kind of perpetuates bad feelings, that perpetuates a greater potential for for bad feelings, for bad relationships and bad diplomacy. So, I mean, Professor Peterson saying not necessarily by just being nice and that you're going to create some kind of opening for diplomatic relations, but I mean, what kind of initiatives would you suggest that America makes to North Korea in order to create some kind of opportunity for diplomatic relations and for for less of these kind of nuclear threats that Kim Jong-il is proposing?
I'll start off, and the others can disagree with me on that. I mean, it strikes me that if you look at the extremely difficult problem of dealing with North Korea today, that inducements alone will not solve this problem. You cannot bribe your way out of this problem. You cannot pay your way out of this problem. You cannot give inducements alone sufficient to take it, because there is no negative incentive. There's no reason for Kim Jong-il not to just take and pocket what he can and then go forward. In other words, there has to be a consequence for North Korea's withdrawing from the NPT. There has to be a consequence for North Korea's refusal. Again, I think it's actually inaccurate to say the U.S. is refusing to talk to them, and we haven't put a proposal on the table, and we haven't engaged. And I'm actually deeply troubled by, while I'm actually, to put everything on the table, I'm kind of a Republican who voted for Bush in the first term, but voted against him the last time. But to have this notion of moral relativism, where somehow that we're equally at fault for the collapse of the agreed framework, and somehow we're equally at fault for this current stalemate, to me is ridiculous, right? I mean, again, the fundamental problem stems from the nature of the North Korea regime. And so the real challenge there is to put them in a position where they have to make a strategic decision. And by that I mean not a tactical decision, not something in the short run where they're going to continue to do salami slicing tactics and sell a part of the program here, a part of it there, sell some degree of ambiguity here and there to kind of move forward a little bit, but to get to a point where they make a decision that having a nuclear program is not in their strategic interest, that they want to give it up, like Libya. So as much as the North Koreans hate the Libyan example, the Libyans realize, man, this doesn't help us at all, it hurts us, right? Let's get rid of it. Now, it's clear to me at this point North Korea has not made a strategic decision, and I don't think you can buy a strategic decision. But what you can do, if you have the simultaneous application of coercive elements and, in other words, severe pressure from China, South Korea, Russia, and Japan unilaterally, where they understand that if they go down this route, there are penalties, and at the same time, if they opt, to move towards, a non-nuclear Korea, just like we've outlined in that joint statement, that there is a future. There's a light at the end of the tunnel as you go down there. And also, let me make very clear, I am one of the earliest supporters of the Sunshine Policy. I agree 100% that engagement is the way to go, right? And so, in fact, in the early years when I was in Scott's position at the Korea Economic Institute, I was constantly in trouble with the Korean embassy, because the Korean embassy at that time was very conservative, and I was saying, separate politics from economics, engage, 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 because the more missionaries, the more investment, the more trade, the more television shows, the more contact you have with North Korea, the more you affect change. And again, I think most of you know this. To be clear, Sunshine Policy isn't let's all be nice and happy to North Korea. It's a very coercive, normative policy, which basically says that by engaging North Korea, we're going to affect change in North Korea. Aesop's fable, right? The sun wins over the North Moon because he is nice to the traveler. He makes him pull off his cloak rather than pulling it tightly around him. I agree with that 100%, but there's a caveat. If we did not have the 1994 Geneva Agreed Framework, we would not have the Sunshine Policy. If Nixon had not gone to China, Deng Xiaoping could not have reformed his economy without that security base. So if you do not have a security foundation, you cannot have that policy of engagement. And so in a nutshell, we're like, Wile E. Coyote, right? Who runs off the cliff and he's standing there and he doesn't realize it, right? The Agreed Framework is dead and gone. The security foundation is out of there. And as much as I might be inclined towards engagement and love it, you cannot imagine away and pretend away and assume away the fundamental security issues that have to be there for foundation. And that's why, the approach that I might be inclined towards does not work today, and that's why we're at a crisis.
I agree with so much of what Gordon says, but I disagree very strongly with some element of it, and I can't quite define how to do this. And I think the basic point of departure will be to say that earlier you used the word you can't have enough carrots, you can't have enough sticks. I think we've got all the carrots. You don't think so? I think we've got all the carrots. I think we've got lots and lots and lots of carrots. I mean, we're talking people up there that are starving and they know it. And we've got a opening to all sorts of economic improvement. And with our South Korean friends, who also want to see economic improvement in North Korea, that all sorts of things can be done to show the North Koreans a better life. I mean, we've got people in North Korea, there have been some interesting studies done of size indexes of of refugees that have moved out into China. And this film this afternoon might talk a little bit about this. And don't get me wrong, as I'm talking about we need to engage, we need to do something, and that you can talk to these North Koreans, I'm not saying it's a nice place. When you see this video this afternoon, if you haven't seen it, it's shocking. It's just absolutely shocking. I mean, this is really a draconian place. And with between 1 and 2 million people starving to death, and it was selected starvation. You decide who gets, in a controlled state, you decide who's going to starve and who's not. And the party's not going to starve, and the army's not going to starve. But it's the people who are questionable and people who have been in the refugee camps and such who are going to be selected for starving. And those that didn't starve, we're talking the people who have gotten out, the 17-year-olds have growth indexes like 14-year-olds. And 11-year-olds have a growth index like 7-year-olds. I mean, we're talking severe starvation that has impacted the height and the health of a great number of the people in North Korea. And so I think we've got all the sticks, all the carrots in the world, and the sticks are there too. I mean, it's standard political science that you have, the sticks and the carrots, and you're talking about having the punishments, the threats of punishment for leaving the NPT and all these sorts of things out there. Those are obvious. I mean, we've got 38,000 troops in South Korea. We've got a nuclear umbrella around. I mean, that's what we're talking about. They know the threat is there, but the carrots aren't there, and we've pulled back from the carrots and from any negotiation or any discussions. And it's not just me that's saying this. Read Don Gregg online. I mean, he's saying we need to talk to these people. And there's no talking going on. And we're so fussy about, as you said earlier, what we want now is not a halfway mark of closing down nuclear things. We want complete, irreversible, and verifiable dismantling. Well, why do we have to go to that position? It's like saying we're not going to talk to you, which is exactly the position that we're in.
Well, yeah, I apologize today if I've sounded like the neoconservative mouthpiece for the Bush administration. It's not my intention. I just wanted to bring a little political reality into the mix. And along those lines, with carrots and sticks, perhaps the United States does have all the carrots, but it's not going to use them because Congress would never, in any conceivable deal in the next couple of years, give any type of financial resources to provide those carrots. So that leaves it to the South Koreans and that the abductee issue can be resolved to the Japanese. Now, what can the United States realistically give to North Korea in some type of deal? Probably some type of security assurances, and they can work out a multi-party deal. But the way things look now, it's probably going to be left to South Korea to fund any type of agreement that comes out of it. And does that mean that the United States only has coercive measures? Well, I think for a long time, the reason you've seen so much inaction in Washington related to North Korea is people didn't know what to do. How do you actually affect the regime? And the military option isn't considered very viable because you're going to lead South Korea into the fray. However, with the financial regulatory action used towards the Macau Bank, the Bush administration may have stumbled onto something that they think could be an effective tool. And I think this may become the Bush administration's plan B. You're going to see more and more of these type of financial coercive measures and see how the North Koreans react.
Thanks to the panelists. A great topic. As from someone who learned about North Korea from living about 30 miles or so south of the DMZ in Seoul in 1980, is an interesting discussion. 1980 Seoul was the Seoul of the monthly civil defense drills when the alarms would go off and you'd have to go inside for 15 minutes to get off the streets, and the gun emplacements were on top of the buildings, and we'd see all sorts of propaganda here and there. And I can remember one day out tracting in the hinterlands somewhere, running across a cache of North Korean propaganda that someone had brought with the big-nosed Americans holding guns and killing the Korean children. This is a long-term and fascinating issue. Thanks to our panelists today. I'm glad they disagree. We have far too much agreement at BYU. I'm glad they disagreed because we can learn from the disagreements. Now, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and it appears that Ramona and others have prepared what was, for me, my standard food staple while I was a missionary in Korea, and that's a choco pie. So please indulge in a choco pie and a drink on the table, and we'll reconvene at 5 after the hour.